Are you all back? Can we continue? Good.
Recording in progress.
All right. Thank you very much and welcome back from the break. Are there any questions so far? Is everything clear? Can you respond? Let me know what's happening. Is everything clear so far? Are there questions? I need a response. Are there any questions? Are there any issues you need clarifications on, or is everything clear? Okay, all right. Yes, I will try and get that for you. I will try and get the access for you as I promised yesterday. So I'll do that sometime today, okay? Anything else? Can I just check? Do some of you have access to the recordings? Or is it all of you who don't have access? Can you hear me? Okay. So who has access? Does anybody have access? Please, I need a response so that I can move on. Okay. Any student with an access? Okay. Okay. I will try and get that sorted out. Okay. All right. Let's continue. So we move from the research philosophy and the research approach. The next is looking at the research strategy. The research strategy. And there are a number of research strategies, some of which we've already talked about. So some of them, you can use case studies, surveys, interviews, archival research, action research, experiment, grounded theory. These are some of the research strategies that you can use. So for an experiment, it will involve kind of a theoretical hypothesis, selection of samples from populations, and random allocations of the samples, measurement of a number of independent variables, and control of all other variables to determine whether the hypothesis are valid or they need to be rejected. So it's, in a sense, experiment to some extent is more quantitative at times, most times. Okay. For a survey is also more quantitative, or is pretty much quantitative, and is popular in business research. Is perceived to provide reliability and validity and generalizability of responses. It allows collection of quantitative data as well as qualitative data. The data can be analyzed quantitatively, and samples need to be representative. So you need a large number of samples from the population to be able to generate a generalizable responses or generalizable results. It gives the researcher independence, and the researcher always use things like structured observations, questionnaires, interviews to collect the data. A case study is also another strategy, usually in collecting qualitative data. So it provides, it helps provide explanation or a rich understanding of the phenomenon or a context. It uses and triangulates multiple sources of data. So you can use interviews, you can use focus groups, you can obtain documentary information, maybe information from the company website, to triangulate, to validate the information and also the phenomenon. So a case study can be categorized in 4 ways and based on 2 dimensions: a single case or a multiple case. So a single case is when you focus on one company or one issue, or multiple cases where you focus on maybe a number of companies, a number of organizations. It could also be holistic or embedded case. So again, if you're doing a single case, you just need to analyze the company. But if it is multiple cases, you need to analyze the individual companies or individual cases, and then you do what we call cross case, within case analysis, and also cross case analysis. Okay, so and the aim is to try and provide understanding of the phenomenon within that particular case study. Action research involves trying to validate validate answers within organizations, okay, trying to find relevant answers within organizations. So it is research in action, and the researcher is always pretty much involved in the whole process of the research. Is pretty much, this doesn't exclude himself. It's part of the phenomenon, and therefore it helps the researcher to be to understand what is happening, and also be able to influence the whole process of the research. Now, grounded theory is another approach which is based on theory building, whereby theory is not adopted, but the focus is to obtain data that is then used, that will then be analyzed, and the findings can then be used to develop a theory. And it helps to predict and explain a phenomenon, or explain behavior, explain patterns within organizations or within society. So it helps develop theory from data generated by observations, and they use interpretivist approach, not deductive approach. Okay, they use inductive one approach as well. So after the research strategies, the next thing to consider is the research choices. And there are a number of choices or tactics to use. You have mono method or multiple methods. And the mono method, you could have quantitative or qualitative, or you could use multi-methods. That will be multi-methods or mixed methods. So for the mixed method, you're using either a simple qualitative or quantitative, or mixed methods, you're using a complex mix of qualitative, quantitative, and different approaches of collecting that type of methods. Now, the multi-method, again, you could use multi-quantitative study, so different approach, different quantitative approaches, and then also multi-method using qualitative study. So you could use different types of combination of different qualitative approaches. So that might be case studies, interviews, and so on and so forth, to try and provide explanation to the phenomenon. So here are some of the explanations, further explanations. So for the mono method, it is based on single data collection method, maybe survey or interviews or case studies. Multi-method, more than one method used to collect the data. A multi-method quantitative could be using either surveys, or also obtaining some data that is already there. And then multi-method qualitative, as I mentioned, you could use different approaches. And then mixed method is where you have used both quantitative and qualitative. So from that point, we then go on to look at the research methods, and research methods refer to all those methods which the researcher, or you as the student, or the dissertation writer will use to undertake the research process to solve the problem. So they applied during the course of studying the research problem, it encompasses both qualitative, quantitative methods of performing research operations, such as survey, case studies, interview, questionnaires, observations. So, and again, remember, all these are just kind of replication or emphasis of most of the things I've already discussed. So in choosing any of the research methods, you need to ensure that they explain the appropriate research strategy and the appropriate research approach, inductive, deductive. They explain or they align with the research philosophy, either ontology, epistemology, or axiology. Okay, so everything needs to be aligned, and therefore it's important to understand which of these methods are drawn from any of the philosophical angles, any of the research approaches, the research strategies, and the research strategies. There are two main dimensions. So you have qualitative measures, and then you have quantitative measures of research methods. So qualitative can be descriptives, based on statements, based on text, based on words. It's not focused on numbers, okay? And usually it is based on interpretation of the words or the text that has been generated. And the analysis is it's based on interpretation or ethnographic or naturalistic approaches. And usually the views and the values and the biases of, at times, of the researcher is involved. For quantitative, it is always based on the number of, based on numbers, based on responses, with the aim of those responses being coded in numbers, and the analysis are done in numbers. And they will use statistical analysis to analyze, to find the results. It can be quantifiable. It is actually quantifiable. So those are the two main methodologies. So for quantitative, again, it's pretty much based on, if you look at the examples here, it's based on numbers, but here it's about what people feel, what people perspectives, views are, and that is what the researcher obtains. Okay. So the methodological choices, quantitative is used to test hypothesis, to establish validity in in terms of natural sciences. We use tables and statistical tests to validate or to test the hypothesis or the research questions. And an example is how often students use program development tools. So you could collect data to test that, to find how often students normally use program development tools. But in terms of qualitative, it is more about textual analysis, thematic analysis, content analysis. And the aim there is to provide explanation using thematic analysis. So the choice is always between the two, but there's sometimes, as we have seen in pragmatism, in pragmatic approaches, some researchers will choose both to try and then at least make up for the weaknesses in either of the approaches. And there are reasons for using mixed methods, using both approaches. At times is used to initiate, for initiation, to facilitate discussions or ideas, or to expand a bit more the insight, further explanations to the phenomenon, to complement each other. So use the qualitative to complement the findings of the quantitative, and also to enhance generalizability. Again, it provides a bit of diversity for different aspects of the phenomenon, of the issue. And again, it helps in solving problems. It aids interpretation. It facilitates triangulation. I always say triangulation. It is trying to use different angles to establish the truth, okay, to validate the issue or the answers, and again to provide confidence in the answers or the results that is being generated. So we said that in your study, your dissertation, you need to conduct primary data collections, and these are some of the tools: surveys, questionnaires, interviews, case studies, focus groups, observations, and experiments. Surveys, questionnaires are pretty much quantitative, positivist approach, objective measures based on deductions, interviews, case studies, focus groups, observations, experiments are also based on inductive, subjectivism, interpretivist approaches, subjectivism, and those help you generate words, responses that you would then use to find answers to the phenomenon. So you can see that we've gone through the various process of the research onion, from the philosophy to the research methods or research tactics. That is the ways of collecting and analyzing the data. So if you understand the research onion, I think that should help you in terms of your development of the research methods chapter. Again, there are time horizons issues to consider when it comes to the data, the methodology. You could have cross-sectional, which is data collection at one point in time. Maybe you collect the data in October, in March, in April, or you can collect the data at several points in time, just to measure whether the situation is consistent. Cross-sectional, you have different samples, but longitudinal, you can have the same sample. Snapshot, the cross-sectional is a snapshot of a given point. So you don't monitor the change over time. And so that is the time horizons of the data collection approaches. Okay. You can get more information on the methodology by using this book that has been made available. So explore that. If you have any further questions, I'm always available to respond. Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions? Any questions? Is it clear? Okay. It's clear. Okay. All right. Thank you. So in that case, I'll move on to section B of this lecture, which is then focusing on sampling. So once you decide on the method, the philosophy, the research methods to use, you cannot, maybe if you want to interview respondents about impulsive buying or consumer behavior, you cannot interview every potential respondent, or you cannot collect data from every potential respondents. And therefore, you need to have a sample. You need to take a number, okay? Get responses from a number, a representative number. That will still provide responses. And when you analyze the responses, the responses will reflect the views of the whole population or the total number of firms or respondents in that particular study. And that's what we call sampling, okay? That is what we call sampling. So for example, you see, let's say in the particular industry, I think yesterday, the other day, we're looking at either the fashion industry. You may have number of firms in there, but you cannot study all of them. And so what you need is you just take a sample and to study the sample. And at the end, the sample should be a representative of the population. So each of the respondents here, each of the potential organizations here is called the case, okay? And you can focus on one as a case study. And that is why in case studies, it's difficult to generalize the whole, the findings to the population. But in the case of things like quantitative, where you collect much more larger data sets, is easier to generalize. So sampling is defined as the full set of cases or elements in the population. Sometimes researchers collect data on all population cases. That is when maybe a government needs information or there is a requirement to collect data on all cases, all people. An example is a census. Governments from time to time conduct census to know the number of people in the country and the characteristics of that of the population. So they will conduct research, collect data from all people in the country. Those are the times where data collection from all population is required. But sometimes the population is difficult to reach. Not all of them you can access, and therefore you need a subset of that population to get the data from, and that will still be enough to generalize. Okay, so a sample reduces the amount of data collected. Is a subset rather than all the cases within the understudy or within the context or within the industry. So some research questions require you to be able to generalize from the sample. Others might involves no generalizations like qualitative or explorative research. But for things like quantitative, at times they want generalization, and therefore you need to think about sampling. So why do we need why do we need sampling? Why do we need to sample? For some research questions, it is possible to collect data from the entire population, especially when you have a smaller population, but you usually have no time to gather data from the entire population. And that is why we're
Theo lịch
talking
là 2
about,
giờ sao?
I think
Nhưng mà
2 days ago, talking
mới
about
phần 2 thôi.
conducting your research that works. Okay,
Nên chà
at this level, you don't have the time and the resources, and so a representative, a sample is enough. But if you have a population that is, or cases that are not many, and you want to study all of them too, that's fine. That's all right. So the importance of defining the research population clearly is always relevant, required in your method section. So if the research question is about all owners of, let's say, Dell laptops, or all EV car manufacturers, all dairy milk producers in Vietnam, or all coffee shops in Ho Chi Minh City, or all female entrepreneurs in Ho Chi Minh City, you need to define it so that you can then identify whether you can access the whole population, or you need to sample. That is to draw a representative from the population to conduct your data collection. Sampling and its classification. When it is not possible to collect data from the whole population, the researcher needs to sample. Okay, and sampling is valid alternative to census when you cannot survey the entire population, whether you don't have, also if you don't have money or resources to conduct all access all the potential respondents, or you don't have the time. So there are two types of sampling. You have probability sampling and non-probability sampling. And probability sampling and non-probability sampling are depicted here, in this slides. You have the probability sampling that you have in types like random sampling, systematic, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling, or multi-stage. But in non-probability sampling, you have quota, snowballing, purposive, self-selection, convenience sampling, extreme homogeneous, typical case, critical case, and heterogeneous sampling. And I will try and see if I can explain each of these. So when we talk about probability sampling, it is more about selecting the sample using certain criteria. Okay, using certain criteria to select a representative sample or number within the population. And there are types of probability sampling. So the random sampling, simple random sampling, is when you select perhaps organizations, let's say a total number of SMEs, you decide to select randomly a number of SMEs in Ho Chi Minh City or in Vietnam. But you would have given numbers to all of them list all of them, and then you select them randomly. Okay, you select them randomly. But others also use what we call systematic sampling, where maybe the researcher, or you as the researcher, will have the list, and you go through the lists, and maybe you select every number 5. So for example, you select 1, and then 5, and then 10, 15, number 20, number 25, number 30, number 35. So every interval, to make up the sample. So it's not randomly selecting from the numbers, but you are going systematically, picking certain interval companies or respondents in certain intervals. And then you have stratified random sampling, which is a modification of random population, but this one is split. The population is split into two groups. Okay, 2 groups. Maybe you have male entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, and then you split them into 2 groups. Or you have young entrepreneurs and older entrepreneurs. You split them into 2 groups, and then you can select randomly from each of the groups. But you also have what we call the cluster sampling, which is similar to the stratified random sampling, but the clusters are used rather than individuals. Okay, so the clusters are used rather than individuals. So for probability sampling, you identify the sample frame based on the research questions. And when I say the sample frame is the list of all populations, or of all potential firms, okay, list of all firms or all potential respondents. And then, or it is the population, okay? You would then select a suitable sample size. Select a suitable sample size. And then to do that, you select an appropriate sampling technique, and you select the sample. And check the sample is representative of the population. So if you have maybe 100 or 500 SMEs, or marketing companies, or fashion companies in Ho Chi Minh City or in Vietnam, you have all of them as the sample frame. You decide how many you can take out and survey as a representative of the sample frame or the population. And then you decide what is the technique. Will you use random sampling? Will you use systematic sampling technique? What would you use? And then you use that to select the sample, and then you check to make sure that the sampling is representative of the population. So probability sampling is also called representative sampling. It's used in identifying suitable sampling frame. Implications, but it also has implications for generalizability. So as I said, the sampling frame for any probability sample is the list of all cases in the target population, from which you then select your sample. Okay, and an example is given here. For example, for a researcher that is conducting research about registered child minors in, for example, Ho Chi Minh City, the sampling frame might be a directory of all child minors in the city. And then, because there may be so many of them, the researcher cannot access all of them or interview all of them or send survey questionnaires to all of them. So he or she would take a representative. If it is quantitative, then we'll look at perhaps selecting a proportion by using any of the probability sampling strategies. So it ensures that the sampling frame is complete and accurate and up to date. So in probability sampling, you also have to think about the response rate, okay? And usually, the higher the sample size, the better, okay? The better. And response rates typically vary according to the research method used. So for questionnaires, between 10 to 50%, or even more. In some contexts, it can go up to 80%, but the generic rule is 10 to 50%. It's fine. For interviews, it can be up to 90%. And so selecting the right sampling strategy is very good, and it's required. And you need to explain that explain the sampling strategy you are using in your dissertation. So probability sampling involves simple random sampling, as I explained, systematic random sampling, as I've explained, and stratified random sampling, again, as I explained, based on strata, dividing the population into maybe 2 or more subsets, and then you selecting randomly a number from each of those subsets, okay, a number from each of those subsets, to then provide a representation of the sample or the sampling frame. But cluster sampling is where you divide the population into discrete groups, into clusters, in terms of industry, maybe the type of firms within the particular industry, and then you select a number of clusters from that, or select a cluster and then collect data from every case within the particular cluster. Okay, so if there are about maybe 8 clusters, you can select 2 clusters and then focus on that. So these are the types of probability sampling. Multi-stage, as I explained earlier on, again, is a development of cluster sampling. So here you develop a list of all stages. Okay, so for example, maybe your regions or counties within the country, and select a number of, let's say, your regions, or regions or cities. But has, I think you have a number of counties, and then you divide each into all towns and select a sample of towns using random sampling. Then in the towns you have selected, you then use you generate a list of all organizations in that town, and then use either a systematic random sampling to select your overall sample. So it's based on different stages. So you start with maybe the regions, or you can look at the region, let's say the Asia region, and look at the countries, and then look at the cities, and look at the towns, and then select a number of towns, and then list all potential organizations or respondents from those towns, and then use systematic random sampling to collect your data or to generate your sample and then proceed from there. Non-probability sampling, on the other hand, which is the second type of sampling, is more or less focused on selecting cases from the population. But in this case, at times the population may not be known, okay? May not be known. So you can select a case just to represent, but you may not know the whole population. So you cannot make statistical inferences about the characteristics of the target population or the sampling frame. And hence, most times we don't use quantitative or statistical research or statistical methods or analysis. Often is associated with case study research strategies. So we have sampling strategies such as quota sampling, where a certain quota, a certain percentage, a certain number is selected for the interviews. Purposive sampling is also based on the judgment of the researcher to select particular type of companies based on their characteristics that the researcher may feel that will best address the research questions and the research aims. So they will select those firms or potential respondents with those characteristics. Snowballing sampling is when the researcher does not know much about or does not have access to many potential organizations or respondents, or doesn't know people who can, many people who can respond, and therefore they will start with a few that they know. And once they finish interviewing, they will ask for further referrals. And then it's through referrals that they get to interview more, get more respondents to interview, and that's what we call snowballing. A self-selection sampling is where each case identifies the desire to take part in the research. So here, the respondents' organizations identify themselves or show desire to participate. And then convenience sampling is when the researcher selects haphazardly. Is based on convenience, based on when the organizations are available. It's not based on any characteristics or any criteria. It's just based on a respondent being available at the time to provide responses. And so those are the no probability sampling strategies. So for all non-probability sampling techniques, apart from quota sampling, there are no rules about the sample size, okay? There are no rules. So, but Saunders et al., who provided the research onion, suggested that some of the sample size are provided here. If it's semi-structured, interviews is between 5 to 25. Ethnography, 35 to 36 responses. Grounded theory, 20 to 35. Considering a homogeneous population, 14 to 12, and considering a heterogeneous population, 12 to 30. So these are based on, again, interpretivist approach, text, subjective philosophy, and usually it is based on thematic analysis, content analysis. And the concept of saturation, data saturation is very important in these in these approaches, in these type of studies, so that if you are collecting your data and at any point that there is saturation of responses, then that is always sufficient, and that's why you have low number of respondents in terms of the sample size. For quota sampling, it is normally divided into is normally about dividing the population into specific groups, as I explained, and a quota is calculated. But cases can be selected within each group. For non-probability sampling, non-probability sampling, you tend to have a purposive sampling, sometimes called judgmental, where the researcher uses his own judgment to select the cases that will allow them to obtain the right information or data to address their research objectives in the research question. So again, it is used for very small samples, very small samples, and you might specifically use things like extreme case or deviance sampling, heterogeneous or maximum variation sampling, typical case sampling, critical case sampling, homogeneous sampling. So, but these are all used when you need, let's say, limited participation. Volunteer sampling, as I also explained earlier, is when the participant volunteer to participate and it's not chosen. In snowballing, you contact a couple of people, the first people, and then they will then refer you to others, or they will link you up with other potential respondents they know. And then in self-selection sampling, you publicize the need for cases and collect data from those who respond. So maybe you send an email out, and people who respond, they will participate. You bring them in to participate in the study. Then haphazard sampling is where sample cases are selected without any obvious principles of organization in relation to your research, or it's called convenience sampling, where it is based on the convenience or the availability of the respondents to respond to your questionnaires. And at times, many students use haphazard or convenience sampling. Now remember, in non-probability sampling, the probability of each case being drawn from target population is known, and you cannot make statistical inferences about characteristics of the target population. So sampling is also another key important aspect in the methodology. So what we have tried to emphasize is that to address your research questions, you need to adopt the right philosophical angle or philosophical orientation. You need the right research approach, the right research strategy and design, and all of them should be aligned. You need the right research method and tactics, and I've gone through all of them. Again, in order to recruit the right character of respondents to respond to your research, to your questions, so that you can provide answers, accurate and appropriate answers to your research questions and research objectives, you need to sample appropriately, and there are different sampling strategies. So research questions that require you to estimate statistically the characteristics of the target population from a sample require probability sampling. But those that do not require that, such as generalization, may use non-probability sampling. Okay. So in choosing sampling, in choosing, you have to always think about the population size and then the sample size chosen to represent the population, and you think about the type of sampling techniques to select and the reason why you're selecting that sampling technique. So in sampling, that is what you need to consider very much. Again, there is the same resource, Omehi and Harrison 2024 textbook that you can access to get more insights on the concept of sampling. Okay. Are there any questions on sampling and research methods? So, your research methods chapter will be chapter 3, and you will need to cover not everything that I've done today, because you have to select which one approaches you will use to help you address your research questions. Okay, so it's important you think about it and then decide and justify. Okay, good. Any question? Any question? Is it clear? Is everything clear? Can I get an answer? Okay. All right. So in that case, I will leave it here. I'll pause it here, and then we'll meet for the last time, for the last session on Monday. Okay, Monday at the same time. Would that be okay? Good. You will use the same link for the session on Monday. So try to join the session on Monday using the same link. Okay? All right. So have a nice weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Yes, so we're going to have class on Monday at the same time. That is what you requested.